Okay, so this is a long video, I admit it. I've tried to timestamp it so you can skip to the parts you might find interesting. I do want to thank Tacoma Wind Supply, that's W-I-N-S-U-P-P-L-Y, for giving me a good deal on the pipe you'll be seeing, especially Troy, who did some research. If you want to buy pipe to build your own drums, you can call them at 253-272-8445. They're on 1114 South 30th Street, Tacoma 98409. I did not get any kind of payment or anything for this announcement. I'm just saying it because they did help me out with the pipes. Enjoy the video. Hello and welcome to another installment of You Can't Beat the Drums. I've done a few of these videos now, and this is the first one I've done that has a lapel mic. Somebody recommended I get one, so I did. I listened to you, the viewer, to try to get inspiration in terms of how I should do these videos. This video is going to be kind of long, and it's going to be full of drum heresy. I realized I opened a Pandora's box when I talked about drum rings and muffling drums in one of my other videos. But this is a long story, so if you don't like talking, as some people don't, they made that very clear in the comment section, you can fast forward. This internet's got this thing where you can put your finger on a little dot, move it along, and actually fast forward to parts of the video you might find more interesting. But this video is going to start out with, how do you make a drum out of a sewer pipe? Now this goes back to when I was in college, and I have these North drums, which I finally a few years ago was able to add to it, restore it, and I really am happy that I have this North kit I always wanted. But when I was in college, I couldn't afford a North drum set, but I thought they were neat. Back in 1976 in high school, I saw Alan White play a concert with Yes, and he had these great drums. They were white, they were beautiful, but I couldn't afford those back then. So what did I do? Well, I had a friend in the plumbing business, kind of like having a friend in the diamond business. That's actually a tagline from a local jewelry store for those of you in the Northwest. You might know that. Those of you in Russia won't have any idea what I'm talking about. Anyway, so I was able to buy some of these. These are just basically 45-degree angle plastic pipe. And they sort of point out, sort of like North drums do. They're not the same as North because they're not fiberglass. They don't have the trumpet, so on and so forth. But for a starving college kid, I thought, I've got a lot of drum parts laying around. I bet I could make some of these. And you can see this particular is the design for a 6-inch, it says, but it's actually, the outer diameter is actually large enough that you can make an 8-inch tom out of this. And I also bought some smaller pipe, and I made a 6-inch tom out of that, and then I've made some 10-inch toms. I actually made 2 of each, and back when I was in college. So this, by the way, is also the first video I'm going to actually try to edit on the YouTube editing system, chopping things up, pausing and starting and stopping. So let me show you some of the finished product, and then I'll tell you how I got there. So hold on, let me just turn this off. So I am back, and what you're looking at is a set of 4 2 6s and 2 10s of the sewer pipe drums that I made back when I was in college. You'll notice that they have the old Ludwig tom mounts on them, and they mount on stands like this. This is the old concert tom mounting system, and I'll use this one so you can see how it works. I love this system. I think it's great. You just basically slide the clip on there like so, and it holds the tom. Of course, you put one on either side, and you end up with a couple of, there you go, a couple of toms mounted on a little stand. And I like that because it's quick, it's easy, and fairly stable. So anyway, the story behind these is long and somewhat convoluted. I'm going to shorten it because people complain about too much talking. There will be some drumming, and you'll be able to hear what these sound like at the very end of the video, but not right now. I'm going to save that till the end, so again, you can fast forward if you want to. But let me take a moment and tell you the story of these drums. So as I mentioned, back in college, I was able to build 6 of these drums. And what happened was I was a drummer, but I only had one drum set. And then I saw this little set in a window of an electrical store that sold lamps and things. And I thought, what's a drum set doing there? I went in to visit. Turns out that the owner of the store had a small warehouse self-storage kind of a thing. And somebody had not paid for their cubicle, and this guy basically repossessed what was in the cubicle, this drum set. It was a 20-inch Gretsch round badge. It was the matching, I believe it was a 12-inch mounted tom and a 14-inch floor tom, a couple of Zildjian cymbals and some hardware, and he was going to let the whole thing go for 165 bucks. So I bought it. And then I had an old Slingerland 13-inch tom and a 16-inch floor tom, and back then I wanted it all to match. That was the big thing. I wanted everything to match. And this is part of the other heresy, which you'll see in person at the end of the video when I show you the whole set. But what I did was I stripped everything off of those drums and I covered all of them with forming formica, kind of a matte black forming formica, and then put it all back together. And the Gretsch bass drum lugs looked fairly similar to the Slingerland lugs of the 60s. So I kept those on the bass drum, fortunately, but all the other lugs I replaced with the Slingerland style lug, which is this. You've probably seen these. Let's see if I can get that in front of you. You'll see how that's what they look like, those old 1960s, early 70s Slingerland lugs. Anyway, I put those on all the toms, and then I took this sewer pipe idea, which I'm going to show you in a minute, these, and I got them all built and so forth, and before I assembled them, I painted them matte black. So I ended up with this kind of cool set with the little curved drums, 6 of them, and then the 2 regular toms, and then 2 floor toms, and the bass drum. So anyway, I had that for years, and when I first built it, actually, I forgot to mention this, this is the most embarrassing part, it was the 70s, right? I covered them all with blue fake fur, and there are some actual pictures of that floating around somewhere, and they were pretty groovy. Anyway, as the 70s waned and the 80s plodded on, I eventually stripped all the blue fur off them, and I did paint them matte black and covered the other drums, as I mentioned, with forming formica. At any rate, I started teaching drum lessons in Tacoma when my wife and I moved here back, it must have been 1988, 1989, something like that. And my very first drum student was a young woman who was 13 years old named Marie, and she was wonderful, just a delight. For years, she always wanted that drum set that I had built. And eventually, she ended up with it and played it and used it for many, many years. And then tragically, when she was 39, she got sick and passed away. And that was tragic because she was a wonderful woman. Now, she obviously, being a woman of strong faith, is up in heaven playing golden drums, and so that's great, and hopefully we'll get a chance to see her again someday. But her mother had the drums packed away for several years, and I kept saying, look, let me buy these back from you because I really liked them. They were unique, and they will remind me of Marie. And finally she said, not only can you have them back, but you don't have to pay for them, you can just have them. I was so thrilled by that. She just gave them all to me, and that was wonderful. But there were 2 drums missing, the 8-inch set of those 6 toms I built. That's the purpose of this video. I'm going to recreate those 2 8-inch toms just as I did back when I was in college and make the set complete. Then I'll show you the finished product. But just in case you want to make some sewer pipe drums, here's how you do it. So stand by. So here we have some of the things you'll need to create a sewer pipe drum. I'm actually going to make 2 of them, but I'll just show you how to assemble one, and then you can certainly rewind the video and watch again if you want to make 2 of them. You'll notice the lugs here I mentioned, and the tension rods. They're the little mounting screws, drum key, drum rims, a couple of the controlled sound batter heads, which some people hate, but that's what all the other drums have, so I figured I would make them match. Someday maybe I'll try different heads on them. This is the chrome trim that goes around the bottom edge, the open end of the drum. And we have the mounting brackets for the tom stand, and the tom stand you saw, and then of course the shell itself. Now, one of the things people always want to know is what does it cost? So I broke down the expenses here. It's not cheap actually. Back when I was younger, I got the pipe at a discount because I had a friend that worked for a plumbing company, as I mentioned. Don't get to do that anymore, so you'll notice the rims I was able to get them online. That's the 8-inch 4-lug rims. The rims for both of them cost me $35. This includes tax and shipping. The rims, $35. The lugs were $43. I got 12 of them because I figured that in case one stripped out, which it did, by the way, when I first got them, I would have some extras. So I have a few left over, but I picked the best 8 out of the 12, got them used, and they were in fantastic condition. My hat is off to the seller for selling something that's actually better than I expected. Then we have the stand top. Now, I already had the base of the stand. I could have got the entire stand for about 130 bucks, but I was able to find somebody on a drum forum, miscellaneous drum parts. There's a forum on Facebook, and the gentleman sold me the top for $68, including shipping, so I added to my base, and I've got the stand I need. The pipe cost me $66, and that was for both of them. I managed to get them for $30 each. Here's the part that's the really expensive ripoff, and that's the chrome trim. The only one place I could find that had the matching trim, which is this, was an auto body repair shop, and it was $15 per foot. Sheesh. But I wanted it to match the other drums, so I had no choice because I went everywhere trying to find it, and that was the only place that had the matching stuff. Auto shops had certain kinds that almost matched, but nothing that really did. Then the paint, I bought 3 cans. I'll probably only need 2, and we'll get to that in a little bit later when I actually do the painting. And then, of course, the clips. I bought a whole box of them for about 20 bucks online, again, eBay. Or actually, it might have been on that drum forum now that I think of it. Anyway, so bought a whole bunch of them, so I have plenty of those. I only needed 2 of them, so I figured you could probably find them for 5 or 10 bucks a piece if you really look for them, if that's the tom mount you want to use. You can always use a different type of tom mount, obviously. Well, the total, including tax and shipping, $332 for the 2 toms and the top of the stand. So is that a good deal? Well, you can buy North drums for probably a couple $100 a piece if you look around, maybe $200-300 each. But the point is, you're going to have something that you made out of sewer pipe. And of course, I know there's going to be all the jokes about, well, it sounds like crap because it's sewer pipe, blah, blah, blah. Yes, haha, I know, I've heard them all before. And you may not like how they sound, but that's okay because everybody has their own opinion, and it's okay to think differently than someone else. People seem to have a problem accepting that these days, but that's actually the way it should be. So let's get started on building our sewer pipe drum. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out where we're going to put the lugs and where we're going to mount the clamp so that we make sure that they're matched so they'll fit on the stand correctly, the right angle, and all that sort of thing. And what we're going to do is use our straight edge here and determine whereabouts we want to mark to have the lugs attach in the correct place, and also where these are supposed to go as well. So let's start off with the lugs. Now we know that the short end here, let me move this drill out of here for a second. The short edge here is going to limit where we can put our lugs because it curves, and the lug obviously is going to, you can't mount it on an angle. That doesn't work. See, that would be silly, wouldn't it? So we're going to put it as low, down, as far as we can go down before we hit this little ridge where it starts to bend. And I've already started. I, of course, made some measurements and drew that the holes should be 1.5 inches apart, and the first hole would be 1 7/8 inches down so that the lug will be in the right place. Now, the reason we want the lugs to be down this direction as far as possible is because the reason the head fits on this drum is because it's small enough in diameter. The problem is it's actually too small. If you'll notice, for an 8-inch head, see, there's a lot of play there. So what happens is, because the head is big, it extends out over the edge. The lug tension rods have to be at an angle, I don't know if you can see this, but kind of like that, extending out, right? They can't be parallel, they have to go out. So the longer space you have, the less that angle has to be for the lugs to work. In fact, as you'll see when we put it all together, the little spring-mounted nuts have to actually be pushed back in now and angled up so the head will even work. It's kind of cheesy. But remember, I was in college when I did this. Didn't have a lot of money, had to make things up as I went, and it does work. These drums are over 40 years old, and the ones I built that are still in existence, and they still work. So hopefully this drum I'm making now will last 40 years as well, and I'll be able to enjoy it when I'm 101 years old. At any rate, so the first thing we do is we take our straight edge and we figure out where those holes are, and I did the measurements and so on. And then what I did, because I'm kind of lazy, is I took a piece of tape, stuck it on the straight edge, and then marked where the lug holes should be. You'll notice there's a little mark there and a little mark there. So now all I have to do is go around to each location and put the little dots where I'm going to have to drill the hole. But how do we space them? What's the way to figure out where these lugs should go? Well, if you look at the drum up close, and when I say drum, what I mean is sewer pipe, you'll notice that there is a seam. I don't know if you can see in the video, there's a seam that runs along here, and then there's also a little tiny mark right there. I don't know if you can see it or not. There's a little ridge, a little tiny ridge right there. Then there's another seam right here, and then there's another little ridge right there. Now, what's interesting is that they're exactly equidistant, but they're in the wrong place for the lugs, because if you try to put a lug on the seam here, you'd run into the plate that holds the tom mount. So what you do is you simply measure between the seam and the little ridge, divide it by 2, and that's where you put the little mark for the lug. The next one, seam, ridge, measure it, cut it in half, there you go. So in between the ridge and the seam, you might have your little marks. That's how you know where your lugs are going to go. So I went ahead and marked those already, so this video won't be any more annoying for you than it already is with me jabbering on and on and on. I have to chortle because there are so many people that were complaining that I talked too much on my last video. They're going to love this one. So we take this pen and we find our line for our lug. We get the straight edge on there so we know it's straight. And then we go down and we say, okay, we're gonna draw a line. Well, we don't really need to draw the line, although I probably will. Let's draw a line, straight line, down like that. And then we make a little line there and a little line there. Okay. Then we come over to the other side here. We do the same straight edge routine. We make a black line right there. And then we make a little mark there for the hole. And we make another mark right there for the hole there. Then we come around here. That one's already done. Here's the last one. We go like this. And we come down like that, and then we make a little mark here, and we make a little mark here. There we go. Now what I like to do, because you know the old saying measure twice, cut once, is I like to take the actual lug and hold it up against the markings to make sure that they're actually right. And if I look at that, that looks perfect. And this one looks pretty good. I think this one, yeah, that's about right. Same thing with this one. The other one that I drew earlier, of course, is already correct. I already checked it. And then this one is good. So now what we do is we drill a hole in the shell. Now, I drilled a pilot hole originally so that I would make sure that I wouldn't go left or right or up or down, you know, skew-if basically. But the plastic is so soft that with a little pilot hole, the large drill bit just kind of jumps through very, very quickly. So it makes me a little bit nervous. Nonetheless, I think I will still drill a pilot hole just because it will help prevent the drill from running all over the place. However, I'm going to use a smaller pilot hole. I'm going to use a 3/32 drill bit. By the way, the distance between the lugs is the distance between, the seam and the lug is 2 7/8 inches. So it's 2 7/8 inches between this and the seam. It's 2 7/8 inches from the seam to the next lug. It's 2 7/8 inches from the center of the lug to the next little mark on the drum. So basically, 2 7/8 is where you measure between the seam and the lug and the little hash mark and the lug. So 2 7/8 is exactly half the distance between the seam and the little mark. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and drill these holes now. We're going to use this kind of overkill here. This drill's a little large, but anyway, so you line up your drill bit. You're very careful to put it right where you want it to be. And these are just the pilot holes, again, to try to make sure I don't end up putting the lugs in crooked. When I was younger, I didn't really have the patience to do this. As far as, pilot holes and all that, I would just sort of gamble and I would just sort of hope it worked and just start with the big drill bit, and if it ran all over the place and the lug was crooked, so be it. Now that I'm older, I do take a little more time to try to make things a little more accurate. It's ironic, if you think about it, that back then when I had lots of time, I was concerned about not spending a lot of time doing things. And now that I don't have as much time because I'm older, I tend to take more time doing things. But hopefully, the things turn out a little better because I have more patience. Now, once again, I double check and make sure that the holes look lined up, and they do. They look pretty good. So that's great. That one looks a tiny bit off. Tiny bit off. Maybe this maybe wants to be a tiny bit lower, or that a tiny bit higher. Well, we'll see. The drill bit that I'm using for the actual final hole to mount these, I wrote it on here, is 19/64. So we're going to switch over now to the 19/64 drill bit, which is this one. And once again, we use the pilot hole as our center point, and we see what I mean? It just goes through like a hot knife through butter. It's very soft material, but it works as a drum. Well, that remains to be seen. You may not agree once you see the finished product. Now you'll notice that this is very close, but as I feared, it is slightly off. But it's not off by very much. So all you have to do, and this again is kind of the primitive Pete method, just round it out just a little bit until it slips in there. There we go. Hey, look at that. Perfect. Primitive Pete was the character in my high school wood shop class. We had a little video that we watched, and they showed the right way to do things, and then they showed the primitive Pete way. And of course, he was the one that used a screwdriver for a hammer and so on. But it was pretty funny, those videos, and my friend Owen and I used to laugh about primitive Pete. That was kind of a long-standing joke that we still refer to today. So I'm trying not to be primitive Pete in this video because I don't want to be ridiculed by all the viewers. Interestingly, my video I did when I compared the North and the Sonar drums, it had, I mean, right now it has like 480,000 views or something, which just absolutely blows me away. I don't know why anybody cares that much about what I have to say, but it made me realize that that you have to be a little careful when you're doing these things in case you have a video that becomes very popular. And this was the one I was worried about it being a little bit too close together, so I'm gonna have to round this one out a little bit more. Anyway, so you have to be careful what you say on these videos, because a lot of people may end up seeing them, and you don't want to look like a complete dweeb if you can possibly help it. And of course, as you see me ream these things out, because the holes weren't exact, I am making myself look like a dweeb. There we go. That's pretty good. Yeah, that'll work. All right. So then last but not least, this one. And we'll drill that out there. And then drill that out there. And now, are we ready? Oh, so close and yet so far. That's actually very close. So we'll just ream this out of the hair. And that should probably do it. Oh, so close. And yet so far. All right. There we go. And the beauty of this, of course, is if you do make a mistake and you mess something up, it's like 35 bucks to buy another shell. So it's not like the end of the world. It's not like you're trying to cut the Hope diamond or something, and one wrong move it shatters and you've wasted $1 million or $10 million or $100 million or whatever the Hope diamond is worth these days. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is mount one of these. Now the thing I want to double check is I have the other shell that I painted already, so we can move through this in one weekend. I don't have to wait for the paint to dry while you're watching. This is probably boring enough as it is. But let me go over and check and see if the mounting is actually on the right side, because what would be horrible is to accidentally mount the plate on the same side of both drums, meaning that one would then be upside down when mounted. So I'll be right back in just a moment after I check that. Okay, so I'm back. I double checked, and yes, this is the right side, and I had measured down 2 inches, and that's about where that was supposed to start, this bracket. So down 2 inches from the top, and then I was able to use the seam to mark the straight line to get this to where I could just basically see the seam through the little hole and then draw the straight line completely all the way down, line it up, use a felt marker to mark where I'm going to drill the holes. And you'll notice that this has outside holes and inside holes, and all the other drums I use the inside holes. So I'm being consistent, and I'm going to use the inside mounting holes. You can see like this. You've got the holes on the top and the holes down below, and I'm using the 2 inside. I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference, but I want to be consistent. Now, one of the problems you'll find with these type of mounting brackets, and you may find this with other brackets you might want to use, is this drum is relatively small, only being an 8-inch tom, actually a little less than that, as I showed you earlier. So you'll notice that the curvature of the bracket is not quite as curvy as the drum, so it kind of rocks back and forth just a little bit. So what I did was I made a little adjustment here in my vise. Get that over where you can see it. There you go. Where I put a little bit of wood on each side so I wouldn't mar the metal. And then all I do is I simply take the little plates, and I'll do 2 at once so they'll match. I carefully put them in the vise, as long as the wood stays put. Between the 2 pieces of wood, I line it up so it's in the proper orientation, And then I just tighten it down just a little, just a hair, to give it a little bit more curve. Not a lot, just a little. And that way it will fit against the drum shell more snugly. Oh, you can see that. See, that's good. So while I'm at it, since I've got the wood there, I'm going to do the other one too, and then I'll be able to take those wood sticks out of the vise, and that'll be one less thing to worry about hitting with my arm, which when you be my age, you do tend to run into things more often than you did when you were younger. By the way, one of the things I'll point out now is going to wait, but I'll show you now, is that the only thing about these brackets is that you can't adjust the angle of the drum facing forward. You can adjust it this way, but you can't adjust it this way. Now that's not a big deal to me, because all I did was I mounted two little washers underneath. You see that? Underneath that end of the bracket. There are the two screws that hold it in place, and I mounted two washers. That gives it some angle. So when I mount the drum mounted on the drum this way, with the washers on the bottom, it then takes the angle of the two drums in the stand and it moves them a little bit that way. And I like that better, because if you're sitting in a circle, you don't want the drums opposite like that. You want them a little bit toward each other, so it makes a nice curve of drums. And that's how I like it. So by adding those washers, it gives me just the right amount of curvature when I set up my drums in a row. And again, the slip-on, slip-off idea, I think, for these concert tom brackets is great. I wish that they still made them. I would probably use them on all my drums. The only downside, I guess, is that they're not particularly strong and sturdy, because you've got most of the pressure on one little bolt at the top and a little less pressure on the bolt below it. The other two on the sides just hold the plates in place. So there is a lot of strain and stress on, let's see, a little bit. Here we go. There's a lot of strain and stress on that one bolt that's holding up the entire drum. So for a very large tom, it might be a bit of a stretch to think it would hold, and yeah, that's great. And stay strong and not snap off. Although, when you look at normal tom mounts, that's kind of the way they work too. If you think about it, there's just one bolt at the top, one at the bottom that hold those brackets on, unless you're looking at a rims system. There's other mounting methods, of course, that are not conventional, or at least weren't until they were conventional until the rims thing showed up. And am I saying that right? No, the rims system was not conventional when it came out, but it seems to work pretty well. I've never tried it. I probably should. Just another one of those things I haven't gotten around to yet. Okay, so we're done with the wood in the vise. So now I can get back to the workbench. Here we go. And the little sticks that were in the vise will not block anybody's view. So now we're going to drill the holes to mount the tom bracket, mounting bracket. So on this, I don't really need a pilot hole, because the drill bit itself is smaller. It's let me put away this drill bit, the large one for the lugs. That's the 19/64 bit. Now I'm going to use a 13/64 bit for the mounting of the tom bracket. So the first thing I do is get this lined up with the first hole and make sure it's going to go in the right place. You can tell this drill bit is not as sharp as the last drill bit, because it takes a few seconds longer to get through very soft plastic. I suppose I should replace this bit. Nothing more dangerous than a dull tool. Just remember, Primitive Pete says. Okay, so what I do now is, of course, I put a bolt in place to hold the plate in place while I drill the next one. This way I make sure that the holes, even though I was very accurate in my drawing, I thought, there's still a chance that things might have slid or moved when I made that drill hole. So now I'm just going to go right through the plate like this, making sure it's all lined up. Then I can take another bolt, Stick it through there to make sure that it's lined up correctly. Then I do the next one. Then I take another bolt, put it in there, and then I take another bolt there. There we go. Now, here's where things get kind of interesting. Put this over here, put away my drill bits. That was the 13/64ths, and then the little 3/32, which I use for the pilot horse. Anyway, here's where it gets interesting, because it turns out that this plastic gets really thick right about there. You'll see that extra reinforcing ring right there. Okay, and what that means is that when you put your lug in, and it would be these lugs right here on the curved part, right? The ones that go there and the one that go there. I'm going to put them in there. The problem is that the back of the lug, which is, you know, up in there, there's no way that this little tiny screw is going to reach to attach the lug. You know, you can try to put the screw up in there to get the lug. Doesn't even really, it barely touches the lug. So what I could do, and probably what I should do, is get longer bolts. Because if I had longer bolts, then they would be able to go through that, extend into where the lug mounts, and there'd be no problem. But because I don't want to take the time to do that, and it would delay making this video, and plus, remember, I'm trying to relive my college days and don't want to spend a bunch of extra money on buying new bolts. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to use this device, which is pretty handy. It's a drill that allows me to drill sideways, and I put one of these grinding balls on it, like that. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to grind through there and make this hole wide enough that I can then put the screw in and it will actually reach the lug. And there's plenty of plastic thickness there. That's not going to hurt anything. So I will start grinding on this like this, and I'll come right back and show you how it ended up. Okay, so I'm just finishing up with the grinding of those holes. I'm going to just do it just a second more so you can kind of see what I was doing there, holding this in like so, and then rounding that out, and then coming over the other side and doing the same thing right there. Just okay. Now, of course, after I did that, I had to knock off the melted plastic that formed around the hole there. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see. Where is it? It's there. There it is, right there. Okay. So I use this little file, and I just kind of, you know, get the edge knocked down so it's a little bit smoother. And all right, so you get that kind of filed down a little bit like so, and then you do the other one, because there are, of course, two that you have to do this for. And also, because I was sort of melting the plastic as I was doing this too, not simply grinding. Plastic does tend to melt if you try to grind it. And now I have to get my 19/16 drill bit out again, or not 19/16. It was, what was it? It was 19/64. So we get the 1964 drill out. 19/64. There it is. Okay, so we get our 1964 drill bit out again. And we have to go through those holes again because they were filled up with plastic because they melted them. Okay, so now you think that was laborious, and of course I'm thinking you're smart enough to just buy longer screws rather than doing all that grinding that I did. Now the next thing we do is we have to sand all of the bumps off this thing, the seams, the mark. That's kind of a mold mark, obviously, and then all the writing, all that has to come off, and another mold mark right here. You have to sand all that off. So we'll do that in just a second. I'll change locations because I want to sand outside so dust doesn't get all over my cars and drums and everything. But first, we're going to use a little of this 91% isopropyl alcohol. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a little shop rag here, and we're going to get this fully drenched. And then we're going to wipe off all the writing. Now, it's interesting, the marker that I used is permanent, it says, and it actually is. It soaks into the plastic, and even though you wipe it with a high-quality Griot's shop rag, you still don't actually remove all of the ink. There's still, as you can see, a fine line. Can you see that fine line there? It's sort of soaked into the plastic. But never mind, because when we do all the sanding, that will all disappear. We hope. No, it will. And then even if it doesn't, I think the paint will probably cover it up just fine. So that's probably as good as it's going to get. You can see there's still writing and everything's still on there, but it will sand off, I think, and or get covered with paint. So let's turn off the video for a second, excuse me, and we will reconvene at the sanding table. Okay, so here I am at the sanding table. I've got my box of sandpaper and so forth, and I'm going to just use this little sanding machine right here. And you might have something more effective. I actually have a big belt sander, but I thought if I tried to use a big belt sander on this thing, I'd probably sand it away to nothing in no time and screw the whole project up. So this is probably a good way to start. And what I'm going to begin with is some 100 grit. That's pretty rough, but it'll get rid of some of the big pieces, and then I'll go to 220 and eventually 320 or 400. Basically what you do is you sand off all the big bumps first, then you go back and do the exact same thing again over all the sanding areas you've already done with slightly finer grit sandpaper, and then you do one more, same thing all over again with the yet finer grit sandpaper, and then you're ready for paint. You got to make sure and wipe the thing off completely, and I actually wet sand the third sanding round with the 320 or 400 grit, and I'll show you that in a second. But the other thing I wanted to show you was this. I stapled a piece of sandpaper, this is I believe 220, onto a board, and I use this to kind of smooth that bearing edge. Once I'm done sanding the whole drum, then I just simply take the shell, once it's all sanded and ready for paint, right before I paint it, I take this and gently go around like this to make sure that there's no rough edges. And after painting, I will probably also do that just to make sure there's no errant paint bumps or anything like that. But for now, I'm going to take my 100 grit sandpaper, insert it in my little Makita sander, and get that locked in like so. Bend it over like this, turn it over like this. This sandpaper was apparently sitting in the box in such a way that it's curling the opposite way it should to fit nicely into the sander. Doesn't that always happen that way? Okay, there we go. So put this down here, and I'll start with this bump here on the side. I'm just going to sand that off, just back and forth, gentle rubbing quickly so it doesn't sit too long at one spot. And this little bump here is kind of tricky. You can see that right there. And the way I do that is I basically come at it from this angle and then use the edge of the sander to kind of get in there and round back and forth like this. I'll show you. This is kind of how I do that. You can see that it's obviously much smoother now than it was. I still need to get it smooth sanded a little bit more, and then I'll hand sand it with my finger and some sandpaper as well to get that nice rounded shape. But that's this 100 grit is pretty rough, and it gets the big bumps out first, but then you're going to have to go back over it with a finer grit and then a finer grit yet to get it really smooth enough for paint. If you tried to paint after 100 grit, it would look very terrible because you would see all those scratches right through the paint. So I'm going to get started now. I'm going to grind these off, get them sanded down, do the same thing with probably 220 grit, and then I'll come back again and show you the wet sanding method for the final sanding portion before we're ready for prepping for paint. One of the things you'll notice if you're using sandpaper on this kind of plastic is that the sandpaper kind of loads up and starts causing little tiny balls of plastic to form because of the heat, I think. And so you got to kind of brush it off periodically, and so the little balls don't end up gouging the surface. So I just finished with the 220 grit, and then I would probably just take a light hand sand over it just to kind of get rid of any imperfections or scratches that might have occurred because of those little plastic balls I was talking about. And then once we're done with this, then we'll go inside and we'll do wet sanding with 320 or maybe 400 grit sandpaper. So stand by and we'll do that in a second. Okay, so here we are in the laundry room with the laundry sink, and I've got some waterproof silicone carbide 400 grit wet or dry sandpaper. And I'm just going to run this under the water since I've already gone over it with 150 and then 220. Now I'll give it a once over with 400, running it under the water so it won't load up. And then once that's done, we'll be ready to prep it for painting. So let's do this. I'll just go ahead and there we go. And you're hearing this. Just kind of gently rub it all over, do all the edges and everything that are going to be painted, including the bottom edge here. We want to get that because, as you'll see, there's a little black rim of paint that'll be on this bottom edge too. So we want to make sure that it's free from any bumps or stray plastic pieces that might screw up the paint. So anyway, we just kind of do this for a while, and you'll notice I'm inside now because it's getting to be nighttime outside. That's because it takes a long time to sand. You better figure 3 or 4 hours of sanding per drum to get them prepped and smooth so that when the paint goes on, they'll look nice. So we'll keep doing this for a while, and then we'll get ready to taper up and get it sprayed. All right, so we're now done with all the sanding. Took, again, a couple, 2-3 hours, but it's very smooth and looks ready for paint. Now to prepare it for paint, one of the things we have to do is we have to tape up the inside, so make sure that when you're spraying from the outside, the paint doesn't come through the little holes and mess up the inside. We want the inside to look nice and clean and white if we can. But before that, we also have to put some kind of trim around, actually the bottom here, because we do want there to be a little lip of black around the bottom to make it look nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use electrical tape like this, and I'm going to wrap that around the inside because it's a little bit elastic, so I can kind of keep it straight. If you try to use painter's tape for the first initial go-around, this is not exactly square to itself, so the tape starts to become off center. So you have to use the black electrical tape to kind of compensate for that. So let's go ahead and do that. First of all, You want to make sure there's no goo or goop or dust or anything around the edge. So you kind of, wipe it around like this. Make sure there's no dust on. This stuff attracts dust, this plastic, like a magnet. Static electricity, I think. Anyway, so you try to get it all cleaned up and looking nice, especially on the inside since that's where the tape's going to be. And then you take your electrical tape and you start taping it. Now, I measured, it was 5/8 in on the other drums I made, so or approximately that. So I want to kind of match, so I'm going to mark 5/8 in, so that's right about there. Okay, and then basically you take the tape, and this is kind of done by eyeball. It's obviously we have the little mark there, and that gives us an idea of roughly where we want the tape to be. But it's not going to be perfect because the tape is a little bit flexible, and you have to sort of eyeball it. And by eyeballing it, of course, you're not going to be perfect. But part of the joy of a handmade anything is the fact that it's not going to be totally perfect. That's what makes it sort of charming, that the fact that it's handmade and not going to be like it came out of a factory, one of a million that are exactly the same. So let's think of it that way. Think of it as a way to personalize your drums if it's not completely perfect. And I will get back to you once I get this tape on there and you'll see the result. Okay, the next thing we do, again, wiping off the inside because this thing collects dust like crazy. If I were a real professional, of course, I'd have a dust-free paint room or something I'd be using, but since I'm not a professional painter, I just have this dusty garage. Anyway, what you do next is you peel off some pieces of tape like so, and then you fold over the edges so they're easy to remove, and then you go through and you, from the inside, cover up all the holes where the lugs are, so that when you spray the paint on the outside, as I mentioned earlier, the paint doesn't come sloshing into the inside of the drum. So basically you cover all the holes like that. Now the next thing we do is we kind of fill up this center part so paint doesn't get all over the inside when we're spraying it. So you take a piece of cardboard. This of course comes from everyone's favorite cereal, Cinnamon Life. Yes, love that stuff. Anyway, basically you just trace around it like so. Does not have to be very accurate, because all you have to do is cut around the inside, and you want to cut fairly small because you're going to use tape to seal it. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So basically you just kind of cut a rough estimate of where you think the inside diameter is going to be on this drum. And we just kind of cut around like so, and like so, and there you have, yeah, that's pretty good. Because now what you do is you take our painter's tape again, and you take the tape and stick it around the outside like this, all the way around, so it can stick inside there. And I'll give you a little hint on how to do that in a second. I'll go ahead and tape these around and be right back. Okay, here it is, a thing of beauty. You'll notice the tape all around it. And then what I'll do is I'll just trim the tape around kind of like this. So it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be exact because we have that wide blue liner inside that we added. But what we're going to do with this is we're just going to stick this in there to seal up the inside of the drum so that paint doesn't get all inside of it. Now you could, I suppose, paint the entire drum black. You could paint the inside and the outside, and that would probably look pretty good. But I kind of like the contrast of the black and white. So when you get that kind of trimmed out like that, Then you attempt to remove the tape from your hand, which gets stuck there. Then you remove the tape from your hand. Then you remove more tape from your hand. Then you take this and you place it inside. Now you can see that okay, with the tape sort of sticking to the blue tape that's already in there. This is a little tricky because the tape obviously is sticky, which is kind of what we want from tape, right? So you slide it in like so, and you pull these up and kind of, oops, okay, kind of stick it in there like this. And rather than show me fighting with the tape, I will pause the video again and come back once it's done. So now, after only minor struggles, it is in the correct position. You can see how that's kind of sealed, and I've got the edges of the black tape still exposed because that's obviously the fine edge that we want to keep in there. And if there's any question about if, for example, some of the tape got goobered up in there and you're not really sure if it's sealed, I recommend adding more tape. Like there's one little area right there where it looks like the tape may have folded under a little. So I'm going to add this extra piece of tape, and just to make sure it's sealed, because you don't want a drip of paint creeping through one opening and running down the inside and dribbling everywhere. That's enough to ruin anyone's day. And if there's little fold up things that are flapping around, little pieces of tape, you might want to seal those too, because if you don't, spray paint can accumulate in there sometimes and again dribble down or run and cause all kinds of hideous results. Okay, so now that's done, and we're now ready for the painting. Now again, what most professional shops have is a tack cloth, which is sticky and pulls all the dust and stuff off. Since I don't have any of those, and I'm probably too cheap to buy one, I just use a microfiber cloth to try to make sure that the dust and junk is all off of this thing. Now there's a little black mark right there. I don't know what that is or where it came from. So I'm going to basically use a little rubbing alcohol. This stuff is pretty amazing. It kind of gets rid of a lot of marks. And I'm going to take this rubbing alcohol and I'm going to try to get rid of that black mark. And it gets rid of some of it, most of it maybe. This is the actual bearing edge. So this is going to be covered up by the drum head and the rim. So it's really not that important. But I figure if that rubbing alcohol doesn't get rid of all of it, then obviously it's going to be fine to just be painted over. All right, let's go set it on the paint table and start spraying. Okay, here we are now with the paint table in position. You'll notice I have 3 little nails underneath to lift it up just slightly so the paint doesn't glue the drum to the cardboard. This is the paint I'm using, by the way, Krylon Fusion. Don't know if you can see that. And it's kind of a primer and paint built in together. So it seems to work pretty well. I'm using a matte black because that's the color of the rest of the drums and because it's pretty forgiving when it comes to mistakes. Gloss black's a lot harder to do perfectly. This stuff looks pretty good even if there's a few little flies in the ointment, as it were. And remember, several light coats instead of heavy. That's the way to do it. So let's see how this works. Just give it a nice light coat. You got to get the inside as well, that inside lip. Got to get down kind of low here. Kind of get that upper lip there. Another nice light coat down here. And of course now the wind picks up and blows half the paint back into the garage. But hey, that's one of the risks of being a hobbyist. Dealing with wind and pieces of tree falling in your paint and flies landing in it when it's not dry. One of the advantages of this paint is it's dry to the touch in 20 minutes, so it gives those mosquitoes less time to dive into your paint project and wreck it. Okay, we'll give it a minute and then we'll give it another coat because you're supposed to wait 1 minute between coats. By the way, you may have noticed I'm wearing a different shirt. It's because today is a different day and I also shaved even though I'm still on vacation. There you go. Okay, I'll show you when it's finished. Okay, so now we have the finished painted product right here, and we're going to put the hardware on the body now, the shell as we like to call it. And I'm not going to obviously make you watch as I put every single lug on this thing, because that would take a long time and it would be a waste of your time to watch it, because it's pretty straightforward. You simply take a lug, you put it in the holes, and then you insert this and you tighten it with a nut driver or a screwdriver, depending on which lug you decide to use. Now, one thing I will warn you about, especially in shells that are real thick like this, is do not over tighten, because as I mentioned in the first section of this, I over tightened one on the lugs that I'm now not using, and it stripped the bolt. So be very careful not to do that. And then, as I mentioned also on the tom plate, I'm going to insert 2 washers between these 2 things, so it'll basically pull it out just slightly, and that will give me a good angle where the drums will slightly tip toward each other, kind of like that, just a little bit, which is good. So I'll put the hardware on and be right back. So you know how in a bad science fiction movie things will change from scene to scene, like it'll be night, then suddenly day, and then suddenly night again? Well, this is an insert. You'll notice my shirt is different. I'm wearing a different color shirt. This is a different day, and this is actually a different drum shell. This is the second drum shell that I painted, and I wanted to show something that I forgot to mention when I did the first shell, and that is that because I drilled the holes down close to the bend on the shell so that there would be a long length between the top of the lug and the head, because we have to have that angle I talked about, what I failed to mention was that the end of the lug, the very tip of the lug right there, that tip right there, doesn't sit completely down flush with the shell. It doesn't seat completely. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but this end right there is a little long and kind of bumps into that curve just slightly. So what I do is I file, I don't know if you can see that, how I filed the end of that just a little bit. And I filed it off so that the end, this end, kind of goes up that direction a little bit. So now, when I put it on the drum, like so, it actually seats better. It fits all the way down because this little end right there has been filed up that way a little bit. So instead of being flat, the bottom of the lug goes like that, just a little. And that makes it seat a lot better. So just a little tip for you. And the other thing is that inside, you'll notice that I have the tape I stuck to cover the hole so the black paint wouldn't get in there, but still you'll see it's quite black inside there, all that black, but that's just paint dust. And with a cloth and a little bit of cleaning material, that will come out and leave the inside white. So that didn't actually, the spray just kind of got up inside, but it can wipe out fairly easily. So those were the 2 things I wanted to show you. Now back to your original programming. Okay, as you can see, the hardware is now mounted on the drum. All the washers underneath there, and the lug bolts are in there as they should be. Now, one thing I'm going to have you do right now, because of the smaller diameter of the shell, as I pointed out in an earlier video, these lug bolts have to be at an angle. They actually, because the rim is so much bigger than the opening of the drum, that they literally have to be, instead of straight like that, they have to be angled out like that to actually make the rim work as well as it should. And now remember, this was me back in college, so I was making it up as I went. So what you have to do is you screw the lug bolt in part way, and then you have to push it in and angle it so the nut is stuck in the angled position. You have to twist it around a little bit to try to get it to do that. And if you can't do it, then you might have to do it when the rim is in place, and that's really difficult. So you'll see that now. You see how that's tipping away from the drum, kind of at an angle like that. Okay, so then you want to just very carefully unscrew it, leaving the nut in the angled position. That way it'll be easier when you get the head on it to make it work. I already did that with this one. This one looks like it's already done. This one is not. So once again, I screw the drum lug bolt in there and then push it in, angle it up, try to get it to stay. There we go. Then you unscrew it very gently. Once the things get in there and are sort of partially screwed in, then the pressure's off in kind of a ironic twist, because once that's in there, then you know that it's threaded correctly. You're not going to cross thread it and everything. It's just that initial beginning point when you're just starting to screw it into the little lug nut inside there. If that nut is crooked the wrong way, or if it's straight, you may cross thread, and that's a bummer. So having them pre-angled like that makes it easier to get the lug bolt started correctly. Now, for most people, this drum as it sits would be fine. You wouldn't need to do anything else, but on the early drums, as I mentioned, they were covered in fake fur. So I used I think it was something to do with needlepoint. There were these metal rings you could get that were adjustable, and I pop riveted a ring around here to seal off the edge of the fake fur. So when I took that off, there were holes left. So I filled them, of course, but I wanted to cover them with something. So in the same way that North drums have a rim around the end of the drum around here, they're black. You can see if I turn this around here, you can see the North drums have that, it's like a plastic-ish, rubberish kind of ring around the end. I thought I could do the same thing with this. So what I found was this chrome strip. This is covered with the blue protective plastic. And I basically ran that around the bottom like that. It's got that Scotch 3M sticky stuff on the back, which seems to work well. And that looked pretty nice, the chrome ring. Problem is, this stuff is, as I mentioned earlier, $15 a foot. I couldn't find it any cheaper. Now, if you're making these for the first time, then you can go to the auto parts store and spend 20 bucks and get a lot of it. It's not exactly half round like this. It might be a little flatter or whatever, but it would do the same thing, look just as good, and cost you a whole lot less. At any rate, so now here's where the razor blade comes in. What we do is we have to cut the edge so it's totally straight. Easier said than done when you're a primitive Pete. But let's take a piece of wood out of the old wood pile there. A little dusty. And start off with a nice straight edge. Line it up and push it down. And technically, you could cut this at a tiny angle inward, like, let's see, like this slightly, since it's going to be coming around and meeting the other end on the drum. But it's such a slight difference that I would probably recommend you don't, and you just make sure it's just a completely straight line, because if you, even have a tiny bit too much angle, it's going to end up looking like it doesn't meet. So far I've managed to cut it twice and really not get it correct yet. And of course, at the price of this stuff, every time I cut, I'm thinking, okay, there goes 5 cents. Nice and straight. There we go. That's good. Then you have to go around the drum and find out how long this needs to be. And I would always start at the bottom, because that's where people are least likely to see any mistakes. So you string this around like so, and get it to where you know it's going to be the right length. Remember, measure twice, cut once. So get this around the edge, get it all lined up so it's pretty close to where it's actually going to be. Then you just simply make a little mark with your razor blade of where you need to make the cut. It's going to be right there. Okay, and you take this down to the little wood again. Gotta make sure that's marked well enough so I can see it. You get old like me, and the old eyes don't work as well as they used to. Anyway, then you get to the little mark and you do a nice straight cut with the razor blade, straight as you can do it. go. Then you pick it up off the floor where it landed. And then you find out how close you were. So I'll turn this so you can kind of see it. Probably like that. You roll it around like this and you say, did it work? And it looks like it came in pretty close. Let's see, you don't want to make it too long because then it'll push itself away. And yeah, you know, I really probably, it's a little tiny bit long, but that's okay because I realized that when I cut, I accidentally cut a little bit too much this way, and I probably should have cut it a little bit this way. So in the few minutes before this revelation, I may have told you to cut it this way, and that's incorrect. It's this way slightly. But again, ever so slightly. If it's straight, it's probably not going to kill you. But I'll try to make this just a little bit angled in, and we'll see what happens when I do that. So I'm angling it in slightly, cutting through with my little razor blade. And then, there we go. Now that's kind of weird. It looks like it didn't completely cut all the way through, so I gotta try getting that nipped off. There we go. So now it's a little bit angled in, like I talked about before. So now we run it around and see how it fits this time. Again, if it's a little tiny bit too short, it's not the end of the world because this is in the bottom of the drum and nobody really sees it. Okay, that seems to fit together pretty good. It's still a tiny bit long though, just a tiny bit long. So I'm going to take off a tiny bit more. Again, you want to be really careful because if you cut it a little tiny bit too short, you're kind of up a creek. Again, it's not the end of the world if there's a little tiny gap, but you want to try to make it as gap free as possible because it looks better that way. Okay, third time's a charm. Let's find out. Get it around like that. And that looks, well, again, it's a little tiny bit too long, just a tiny bit. So I'll cut it one more time. Then I'll peel and stick it around the edge, and I'll show you that in just a second. I'm going to finish getting this cut right. You don't have to watch me try it, 10 times, so hold on. All right, so now we have this cut the right length. Now the tricky part here is you're going to try to find where the center of the bottom is. You want to make sure and wipe it all off so it's clean, and you want to kind of figure out where the middle sort of is. And so what I usually do when it comes to this sort of thing is I use blue painter's tape. That's kind of the silicone rubber in the tape world. It works for everything. And again, you can measure that distance between the lugs or whatever, but since the lugs are at the other end, I usually just eyeball it. And I'll say, okay, I'm thinking, use a drumstick there, I'm thinking the middle's probably right about, there. And so I just put a little piece of tape kind of where I think the middle is. And about there probably. Then here's where we start the sticky stuff. This again, you got to be a little careful because you only get one shot at this. So I want to make sure that it's done correctly. You start by making sure there's not a bunch of dirt and junk stuck to the sticky part, which fell on the floor, as I mentioned earlier, which doesn't help, but I think I got most of it out of there. Then you start peeling this red sticky stuff off the bottom. A little tricky if you don't have long fingernails. Sort of peel that off like this. Okay, and you just peel that off like so. And then you start sticking. You figure out this is kind of about the middle, like we talked about, and you can line it up. Of course, yeah, you want to line it up like so. And keep it kind of even with the bottom. Rolling it around like so. Again, you got to kind of press it to hold it in place, and we're going to get it in place this way first, and like so. And we come around and a little bit more off, and again try to keep it parallel with the bottom. I just had a good shot of my head there, I think. And around like so. Rid of the tape there. And around like so. Kind of keep it even. And then it should line up perfectly with the other end. Like so. Okay, now you got to push it really hard with your fingers, try to keep it in place. You're supposed to, I believe, keep this pressure on for like, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute or something. Kind of hard to do when it's round like this, so I just kind of push it all the way around and try to apply a lot of pressure to get that stuff to stick. The paint is still relatively new, so that may help in the sense that it might grip the paint, and then the paint will dry hard and it'll grab that sticky stuff even more. That's of course a theory that could be completely wrong, but it sounds good. So we just keep pushing it on there, like so. Okay. And when we feel like it's been stuck there pretty well, then you have to peel off this blue protective layer. And this is what's supposed to reveal the gorgeous chrome. Let's see if it works. So we peel off the blue, like so. Got a little, leaves a little bit of goo behind apparently. Oops. Yeah, it's not exactly coming off as cleanly and neatly as I would like, but maybe I'm pulling it too fast. And if there is little discolorations or glitches, you can usually assume that's glue from the left over from the blue. So you can basically just wipe that off with your finger, and presto changeo. Now we have that pretty ring around the bottom of the drum, kind of that finishing touch. See that? How nice that looks. So now we're ready to mount the head. On a normal drum, that's kind of easy. On this drum, it's not because of the angles I mentioned. So I always want to line up my logos so they're at the top of the drum when they're mounted. Call me compulsive. So there's that. And we take the rim, get it lined up. Now here's the part that's kind of tricky because of the angle. So what you have to do is take one of your lug bolts and hope that you can get the angle right. So you start trying to find that. Here's where it helps to have a drum key. And I had a drum key laying around here somewhere. Well, I have this one. This will work. So you get that in there and try to get that started. Okay, that one is now started, so that's good. Then we go to the other side, which I don't know if you can see there. And again, we've got the angle going here, so we try to put it in at that angle and use our drum key to try to find it. Important not to cross thread. Okay, that one went in beautifully, so that's exciting. It's always good to have things work when you're doing a video, you know. Okay, then we do this top one over here. Same thing, get it started. Okay, that one kind of popped out, so I'm gonna have to push it back in and angle it a little bit if I can. Don't know if I'm gonna be able to do that or not. Well, let's see if we can get the other one. Yeah, that's not really gonna work. I think I gotta loosen it a little and push it in again and get that angle. There we go. There we are. And then sort of hold it while I get this one started, which goes again into that angle. Let's see if I can get this one started. And did I go? Presto, it looks like it went in. So that's pretty cool. So they're all in there now. They're all locked in. And they're threaded, I mean, when I say locked in, they're locked into the threads. And as you can see, they are very crooked. See how how they angle out like that? See, they're angling out like that. But it actually does work. So now we'll tune it, get it tuned up, and then we'll add it to the others. And in the final analysis, I'm going to show you what all these drums sound like. So stand by, that's coming up next. So here's the finished product. Those were the two drums I just built out of sewer pipe. And we will hear what they sound like along with the rest of the sewer pipe drums I built in the next segment of this video. Stand by. Here's another quick insert into this video. I had a crack in one of my little 6-inch toms. I realized I didn't know that when I got them. So I took it apart and I basically used this roto zip tool to grind all around the crack. The crack didn't run all the way through the drum. It went from there kind of all the way to there and stopped. So I ground all that out almost all the way through and then filled it with liquid, let's see, what was it? JB Weld, I think it was. Yes, JB Weld. And then I sanded it all down. I'm just getting ready to repaint it. But I wanted to take this moment to explain that this is actually a 5-inch pipe. This is one of the original ones I made 40 years ago. And 5-inch is actually an elbow to join 5-inch pipes together. And so it's a little over 6-inch outer diameter. And the problem is it's slightly too big. So what I had to do was grind the edge just slightly, file it all down all the way around so the head will actually fit on the drum. Once I did that, it fits fine, but you do have to do a bit of grinding if you're going to make a 6-inch tom, and good luck trying to find a 5-inch elbow. I found one and I think the retail price was like $80 just for the pipe. I'm hoping to find a cheaper one. If not, since I fixed the crack, I'll probably just use this one. Anyway, back to the regular video. Okay, so this is the bass drum I was talking about. It's a 20-inch Gretsch model, round badge, but the round badge was removed when I took it apart and covered it. It's a little dusty, isn't it? Covered it with this forming formica, and then I clamped the bass drum rim on with these little metal clamps so I could have no head and still have a rim. Well, I'm now going to add a head. Pressure from my viewers has encouraged me to buy a head and actually put a drum head on this thing. And the horrible part about this, and I didn't realize 40 years ago this would happen, but these little clamps I put on, they basically deformed the shell of the drum. And I don't know if you can actually see it, but the drum is kind of flower shaped now. There's little flat spots all the way around the bearing edge. So I don't know what it's going to sound like, but hey, you know, I was in college. What did I know? Well, here we are in Dave's basement, home of Dave's Basement Band, where we rehearse. And the drum set is finished. And you know, I fixed that cracked 6-inch tom. And so I decided to add it to the drum set because why waste a perfectly good tom? I bought another shell to build a new drum, which I did, and then realized the cracked one works just fine. So I made a little bracket, see that, out of parts, and a little clamp there. So now I have 3 6-inch toms. And I have the 2/8 that I just made as well as the extra 6-inch. They're the original 10-inch that I had. And then there's the holiday model. That's a Rogers holiday model. And that's an old Slingerland 13-inch. That's another old Rogers 14-inch tom. And then a 16-inch old Slingerland tom. And these heads are like 40 years old. I should have bought new ones, but I haven't gotten around to it. I did buy bottom heads for it. Let's see if you can see the bottom heads. I don't know if you can see those, but I bought the pinstripe heads for the bottom, the Remos. So anyway, then I used really some cheap cymbals. This is my practice kit. So I have this cymbal I bought for like 20 bucks. Then there's a Zildjian, which is pretty good, but it's cracked. There's a Zildjian that is actually a cheaper ride, but it actually sounds pretty good for an inexpensive Zildjian. Then there's a Zildjian 16-inch that had a 16, I think. Yeah, had a crack in it, so that was welded. And that actually worked pretty well. And then an old scimitar crash. So this little thing here is a little Wuhan 10-inch splash, and it actually sounds really good for 26 bucks. And then a pair of Zildjian hi-hats. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook this up to an iRig, this little iRig box I bought that allows me to run a mixer into my phone so we can get the sound of the mixer, better quality sound, and still be able to record on my phone. Now see, there's the little 3 6-inches there. By the way, there's Dave. Dave, say hi.
Hello.
That's Dave of Dave's Basement Band. So I'll get another shot of this set so you can get a better view of it. There it is from the front. You'll notice the north-like shape of the drums. There's the snare drum. Now the snare drum, this is going to cause people to completely freak out as well. Actually, let me get a better shot of the whole set there. There you go. The forming formica on the normal drums, and then black paint basically on the special sewer pipe drums I built. Anyway, the snare drum is interesting because it has a pearl badge on it, but when I was in college, I took the whole drum apart and covered it with copper-clad aluminum. I don't know if you can see that. It looks really pretty, and there's the pearl badge on it. Well, I don't know if the shell was actually pearl or if there was a scratch there and I wanted to cover it up, so I stuck a pearl badge on it. I don't know. But the hardware is all Rogers. You can see it's got the Rogers fancy, I don't know if I can get over here and see the strainer, but anyway, I'll see if you can see it. Anyway, but it's got all Rogers hardware. So I basically must have cannibalized a pearl shell and put all the Rogers hardware on it. I don't know. It sounds pretty good. It's not the best sounding snare I've ever heard, but it does the job. It's okay. But again, another drum heresy to destroy a perfectly good Rogers drum. But again, I was 21 years old, 20 years old. You know, what do 20-year-olds know? Anyway, now let's hear what this thing sounds like. Okay, so this is what these drums sound like from the audience perspective. I just moved the mics out front so you can hear how they sound. These are controlled sound, clear black dot heads, and these four are 40 years old, so they don't tune very well. If this video gets enough views and I get enough money from it, I will probably try to buy fiber skin heads because I think they might sound better on these. That was recommended by some of my viewers of the last video. Anyway, this is what the sewer pipe drums sound like along with the Rogers and Slingerland drums. Most viewers hate these things. These are the studio rings, which I used in my last video, which caused all sorts of controversy. People were writing in and screaming about how they can't stand the sound of muffled drums, and I kept saying, yeah, but listen to the late 70s or early 80s songs. That's what they sound like. Here's what the toms sound like with the studio rings on. But since most people don't like those, for the little playing demonstration, I will take them off because that will make people happier. And then if I get those fiber skins, that will probably make the viewers even more happy. So here's what it sounds like. Again, I'm not Buddy Rich or Dave Weckl or Neil Peart. I don't have any illusions that I am. I'm doing this just so you can hear what they sound like, and I'm just having fun doing it, and I'm, you know, out of shape and old, so that's what happens. What do they sound like with jazz? I don't know, let's try. Sound like sewer pipe. Just remember, you may think they sound like what normally flows through them, but that's okay because beauty is in the ear of the beholder. Okay, so this is what this set sounds like from a drummer's perspective. In other words, the mics are back here. And again, these four 40-year-old heads, hard to tune. Anyway, this is what they sound like from the perspective back here. So, let's see, altogether it sounds like this, except I need to turn the snares on, which I forgot last time Neil Peart, I am not. That's what they sound like from a drummer's perspective. So thank you for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, you deserve a trophy. If you don't like it, hey, I'll give you your money back. Anyway, I'm not trying to be fantastic or wonderful or great as far as the drummer goes. I'm old and out of shape, I admit it. But this whole thing was kind of to show you how you can make a drum out of sewer pipe and how you can butcher quality classic drums and then blame your youth, because that's what I'm doing. Thanks for watching.